Hi, everybody. I am Savannah Agardi, the compliance archaeologist here at the Utah Chabot. I spoke to you a couple weeks ago about World Heritage, and today I'm going to be talking about something a little more archaeology focused, which is reconstructing pre-archaic mobility patterns using XRF analysis on obsidian artifacts from the Central Great Basin. So this is a bit of a mouthful and brainful, but we'll explain what this means throughout the presentation. Today, we are going to focus on one regional area, which is the Great Basin. The Great Basin is a physiographic region in the West characterized as having no watershed outlet, so therefore it's just a really big basin. On the figures to the left, the darker area represents the Great Basin and how it is today. You may know the Great Basin as a very dry and arid place. However, during the Pleistocene, which is the environmental epoch that happened before the one we are in today, which is the Holocene, the Great Basin was covered in numerous pluvial lakes. The figure on the right here depicts these pluvial lakes in gray that were once on the landscape. So once you begin to think about the Great Basin as an area with lots of water and lots of wetlands, therefore having a lot of food resources, it becomes more imaginable to think of people living there than based on the current conditions of the Great Basin. You can also see how the pluvial lakes coincide with the basin and range topography displayed on the figure in the left, meaning that many of the basins that you see today were once covered in lakes. So we've just established that the Great Basin was a pristine place to live in prehistoric times. Let's look over a basic prehistoric human chronology of the area. Now, these dates are probably not exact. You'll see ranges of these depending on the source and depending on archaeological information, which is always coming to light on the human occupation of the Americas. Paleo-Indian period, or the Prearchaic, as I will refer to it in this presentation, was generally about 11,400 to 7,000 BC, basically meaning that it occurred 13,000 to 9,000 years ago. There's a lot of debate on when humans first came to the Americas. There's been archaeological sites dated to around 15,000 years old in South America and Idaho. Most archaeologists likely assume that human occupation of the America goes as far back as 20,000 years, but this is the general date range for early occupation in the Great Basin. The Archaic period dates from around 7,000 BC to 8,500, the late prehistoric period from 8,500 to 1,700, and the historic period from 1,700 to 1960. However, today we are just going to focus on the the Prearchaic period, which was characterized by a changing climate as well as Prearchaic people that were highly mobile, nomadic hunter-gatherers. This means that people didn't stay in one place too long. They didn't create permanent architecture like you'll see in some of the southern Utah Puebloan sites. They moved across the landscape, covering large mobility ranges. Archaeological evidence from the Prearchaic is mostly represented through stone tools, as other materials do not preserve well in that span of time, and other tools made out of stone. And here we have a Clovis point, which is indicative of the Clovis culture. This one here was actually found in Utah and is currently housed at the Edge of the Cedars State Park Museum. Materials out of stone tools vary, but a very common material used, especially in the Great Basin, is obsidian, which brings me to the meat of the presentation. Obsidian is created through volcanic processes and is considered a type of fine-grained volcanic rock. It is actually the sharpest substance known to man, even sharper than surgical scalpels, and they've actually performed surgeries using obsidian planes, which is an interesting fact. However, the most important thing you need to know about obsidian for this presentation is that it is sourceable. Obsidian has a special chemical marker that is traceable with an X-ray fluorescence machine, or an XRF, which is up here on the top, the yellow gun looking thing. It's only $16,000 on eBay, so very affordable. Each natural obsidian source, which are created through volcanic processes, have their own levels of rubidium, strontium, and zirconium. Prehistoric peoples would collect obsidian to make tools from these raw sources, and the raw obsidian is called toolstone in this instance. And many of these raw sources exist today throughout the Great Basin. This process of XRF analysis makes it possible to measure the amounts of rubidium, strontium, and zirconium in obsidian that has been made into stone tools by prehistoric people. The specific levels of chemicals that can then be matched to a specific obsidian source for artifacts. This then makes it possible to reconstruct the mobility ranges that prehistoric people had, as you were able to trace where they gathered the raw obsidian from and where they deposited the artifact at an archaeological site. So to put this in an applicable situation, I'm going to talk about a research project that I conducted on obsidian sourcing and reconstructing mobility patterns from true Prearchaic sites in central Nevada. This project was in conjunction with the University of Utah Archaeological Center and the Geochemical Research Center. So big thanks to them for making this project possible. The two sites that were looked at for this project are the Knutson site and 26 LA 4434. Which is a Nevada site number, and they're both located in Grass Valley, which is in central Nevada. The picture here on the bottom is an overview of Grass Valley, which is a valley that used to have a pluvial lake in it. Above the overview shot, we have two examples of Prearchaic bifaces found in Grass Valley. Bifaces are a form of stone tool that are basically prerequisites to a projectile point or an arrowhead. Although these ones in the pictures are an obsidian, these give you a good context of what types of stone tools I'm talking about here. So for the project, debitage, which is the flakes that kind of fall off the tool stone when making a stone tool, bifaces and projectile points made of obsidian from the Knutson site and 26 LA 4424 were analyzed with an XRF by the Geochemical Research Laboratory and able to match the obsidian source to the artifacts. With this analysis, the two sites, which are located really close to each other, were found to have different conveyance zones. So I won't go into super detail here, but the mobility conveyance zones are the areas that prehistoric people were thought to have traveled through the most within. This basically means that the two people who created these sites had different mobility ranges in different areas of the Great Basin, and they also had different motives driving them. So as you can see, the Knutson site here, there's a bunch of obsidian sources, about 8 that corresponded to the artifacts of the Knutson site that range in the Western Great Basin, and they are all near a bunch of pluvial lakes. These lines here on this map represent basically the shortest distance from the obsidian source to the site that a prehistoric person could have traveled. But as you can see, there's lots of lakes, there's lots of obsidian sources. So what was probably happening in this instance for the people who deposited artifacts at the Knutson site is that they were traveling from lake to lake, probably exploiting food resources or subsistence resources, and then probably picking up obsidian along the way as they go. And they all correspond to the central conveyance zone. I looked at another academic archaeological paper who kind of did the same thing in reconstructing Prearchaic mobility patterns with these sites here in eastern Nevada. And that's where I got these conveyance zones from and then applied them to this data as well. However, you can see the 26 LA 4434 site is actually exhibiting a very different phenomena with mobility ranges. Basically, the biggest obsidian source that corresponded to this site is the Browns Bench area, which is over here in southern Idaho. As you can see, there's not really a lot of pluvial lakes along this route or near Browns Bench, which means that there is less food resources, less subsistence resources that people could exploit on their travels to Browns Bench, which means that the people from this site may have been driven to travel across the landscape to procure raw obsidian to make stone tools from, whereas people from the Knutson site were probably just motivated by gathering food resources and then picking up obsidian here and there from different obsidian sources. So this shows a really different way that people traveled across the landscape. And then this distance here from Browns Bench and 26 LA 4434 is about 312 miles one way. So this means that people traveled one way from Browns Bench to the site, and likely a lot more too. So think about traveling 312 miles just walking across the landscape today. That is a really long time to walk. So prehistoric people were really highly mobile. And it's really interesting to see the variation in mobility ranges and what was driving the people. And these two sites that are located really close to each other in so the results from this obsidian analysis shows that the two sites were vastly different in mobility ranges for being really proximal to each other. The Knudsen site covers a larger range with more toolstone resources, which means people were probably chasing subsistence and food. And the people who were depositing artifacts at 26 LA 4424 were driven by procuring toolstone and not food resources. So this shows a very large variation of pre-archaic life in the way that people traveled across the landscape and what drove people to move across the landscape in the way that they did. And then I'll just leave you here with this figure of a Great Basin projectile point typologies. And I always love projectile point drawings. They make me happy and they're very cool in my opinion. So that is all I have for you guys today. Make sure you turn into the next virtual education and self-isolation live event right here on the Utah SHPO Facebook page.